Hey guys, tonight we're going to embark on a rather delicious, albeit slightly dangerous, journey. Close your eyes for a moment, if you dare, and imagine yourself standing on a dusty ancient path, the sun beating down, an endless horizon of sand and distant mountains stretching before you. You can almost smell the exotic spices, hear the distant jingle of camel bells, feel the parched earth beneath your worn boots. This isn't your local supermarket trip. Oh no, you're not just grabbing a pre-made meal off the shelf. You're part of the chain, a link in the human story of food, trade, and survival along the legendary Silk routes. You're about to discover how the very concept of a meal, of a shared dish, crisscrossed countenance, bringing with it not just sustenance, but culture, innovation, and sometimes a whole lot of drama. This wasn't a quick jaunt. It was a grueling odyssey, and let's be honest, you probably won't survive this trip without a few bouts of dysentery, a sandstorm or two, and a very real chance of being robbed by bandits. But hey, at least the food was fascinating. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening in, let me know where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself, in this moment, a phantom traveler on the cusp of something monumental. You're standing at the threshold of history, specifically, the intricate web of ancient trade routes that collectively became known as the Silk Road. It wasn't just one road, you understand, but a sprawling network of pathways, both overland and maritime, connecting east and west, from China through Central Asia, India, Persia, and into the Mediterranean. Think of it less as a highway and more like a spiderweb spun across a vast, unpredictable continent, each strand carrying something precious. While we often think of silk when these routes are mentioned, it's right there in the name. After all, the reality is that the movement of goods was far more diverse. And nowhere was this more evident than in the exchange of food. See, silk might have clothed emperors, but food fueled the empires themselves. Without a reliable way to sustain the traders, the guards, the merchants, and the local populations along these routes, the silk would have stayed put. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Silk Road wasn't just about luxury goods. It was equally, if not more, about the daily necessities, and among them, food reigned supreme. Consider the sheer scale of the operation. Vast caravans of camels, sometimes numbering in the thousands, trudging across deserts and mountain passes, each animal burdened with goods. You can almost hear the soft padding of their hooves on the sand, the rhythmic creak of their loads. Imagine being one of those merchants, knowing that your survival and the success of your venture depended not just on dodging bandits or navigating treacherous terrain, but on having enough to eat, and crucially, enough of the right kind of food to keep you going. This wasn't about gourmet dining, it was about caloric efficiency and long-term preservation. A quirky tidbit, perhaps, but one that sheds light on the practicalities of medieval travel. Many caravan drivers would carry pouches of dried apricots and nuts, not just for their energy, but because the natural sugars in the apricots helped to stave off thirst in the arid climates, a sort of ancient energy gel. If you will, the idea of the Silk Road conjures images of mystery and exoticism. But for those living and working along it, it was a brutal, demanding reality. Yet, it was this very hardship that spurred innovation in food preservation and preparation. you had to be resourceful. You couldn't just pop down to the corner shop for a ready meal. Every calorie, every drop of water had to be accounted for. Historians still argue whether the Silk Road was primarily driven by demand for luxury goods in the West or by the persistent need for basic commodities and foodstuffs that could sustain these vast, interconnected societies. Perhaps it was a bit of both, a dynamic interplay between desire and necessity. What is clear, however, is that the movement of food, seeds, and culinary techniques was as vital, if not more so, than the flow of shimmering silks or glittering jewels. You're about to delve deeper into the specific ingredients that made this possible. The humble beginnings of what would become a global pantry. As your phantom journey continues, you're now shifting your focus from the grand sweeping networks to the very bedrock of ancient sustenance, the staple grains. Before you could have spiced tea or exotic noodles, you needed the basic building blocks, the carbohydrates that fueled these epic journeys and sustained entire civilizations. For much of the Silk Road, particularly its western and central reaches, wheat was king. You'd see vast fields of it, swaying gently in the breeze. A sea of gold against the sometimes harsh landscape. This wasn't just a crop. It was the foundation of life. Imagine the back-breaking work of planting, harvesting, and grinding it into flour. A process that has remained remarkably similar for millennia, give or take a few mechanical advancements. You're watching families tirelessly working, knowing that their very survival depended on the success of that year's yield. But wheat wasn't alone. In the eastern parts, especially in China, millet played an equally, if not more, significant role. Think of hardy, drought-resistant grains that could thrive where wheat struggled. Millet provided a caloric punch and was versatile enough to be cooked into porridges, flatbreads, and even fermented into simple alcoholic beverages. It's a mainstream historical fact that the cultivation of both wheat and millet, and their subsequent processing into various forms, allowed for the population growth and sustained travel that underpinned the Silk Road's success. Without these reliable sources of energy, those long caravan journeys would have been utterly impossible. You can almost feel the grit of the coarsely ground flour between your fingers. Taste the simple, earthy flavor of a freshly baked flat, warmed by a portable fire. The transformation of these grains into early dishes was a testament to human ingenuity. Forget your fancy sourdough starter for a moment. These were practical, often rudimentary preparations. You'd encounter simple, unleavened flatbreads, cooked on hot stones or in basic clay ovens. Think of them as the original grab-and-go meal, perfect for travelers. They were sturdy, filling, and could be made with minimal equipment. A quirky tidbit: some ancient flatbreads discovered by archaeologists contained traces of wild herbs and even tiny insect fragments, suggesting a less than picky approach to foraging and a pragmatic view on protein sources. Talk about adding crunch to your meal. You might be grimacing now, but back then it was just calories. You'd also see various forms of porridge or gruel. These were the ultimate comfort food and survival staple, made by simmering grains with water and perhaps a bit of salt or whatever wild greens could be gathered. They were easy to digest, could be stretched to feed many, and provided warmth in cold desert nights. The constant need for sustenance meant that every part of the grain was utilized, every cooking method optimized for efficiency. This wasn't just about eating. It was about fueling a vast, interconnected economic and cultural system. Historians still argue whether the earliest forms of wheat cultivation spread from the Fertile Crescent westward, or if there were independent centers of domestication. Regardless, the impact of these cultivated grains radiating outwards was undeniable. They provided the caloric foundation upon which empires were built and trade routes traversed. You're witnessing, in essence, the very dawn of organized agriculture, providing the backbone for global connectivity. The simple act of boiling some grains in water or baking a flatbread wasn't just a meal. It was a link in a chain that stretched across continents and centuries, connecting distant lands through the shared need for survival and sustenance. As you move along, remember these humble grains, for they are the unsung heroes of the Silk Road's culinary narrative, paving the way for the more exotic flavors to come. You're learning that even the most basic elements have stories, deep and rich, if you just know where to look, or rather, where to taste. Alright, now that you've got a good handle on the foundational grains, let's talk about something a bit more exciting. Something that could make even the blandest porridge sing. I'm talking about spices. These weren't just about making your camel stew taste better, though they certainly helped with that. On the Silk Road, spices were liquid gold, power, and often medicine, all rolled into one tiny, aromatic package. You're now breathing in air thick with the scent of distant lands, perhaps the sharp bite of ginger, the warm embrace of cinnamon, or the heady perfume of cloves. You see, for millennia, long before your local grocery store had an entire aisle dedicated to them, spices were commodities of immense value. Think about it. A pinch of pepper from India could be worth more than your average laborer's monthly wage in Rome. It's a mainstream historical fact that demand for spices like pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves fueled much of the maritime and overland trade that formed the Silk Road. These aren't just pretty powders. They're the driving force behind empires sending ships across dangerous oceans and caravans across treacherous deserts. You can almost see the glint in a merchant's eye as he haggles over a small sack of something incredibly fragrant, knowing the immense profit it will bring. But why such a fuss over something you probably have casually sitting in your kitchen cabinet right now? Well, beyond just flavor, spices served incredibly practical purposes. They were used to preserve food, especially meat, in a time before refrigeration was even a twinkle in anyone's eye. Imagine trying to keep food from spoiling on a months-long journey across the desert. Good luck. But certain spices, with their antimicrobial properties, could extend the shelf life of provisions just enough to make survival possible. A quirky tidbit is that some cultures even believed certain spices could ward off evil spirits or protect travelers from illness, essentially making them the medieval equivalent of a good luck charm and an immune booster all at once. So, that clove in your spiced tea, it might have been considered a mini superhero. Beyond preservation, spices were vital for their medicinal properties. Ancient physicians, from Chinese herbalists to Persian healers and Roman doctors, all relied heavily on various spices to treat ailments. Turmeric, ginger, cardamom. These weren't just culinary ingredients. They were the pharmacies of the ancient world. You might be suffering from indigestion, and a kind merchant, rather than offering you an antacid, might suggest a brew infused with star anise. It was a holistic approach to health, where food and medicine often intertwined seamlessly. And then, of course, there was the pure, unadulterated pleasure of taste. After weeks of monotonous journey food, the introduction of exotic spices could transform a dull meal into something truly special. It could even be a sign of status. To serve heavily spiced food was to subtly boast of your wealth and connections to the far corners of the world. It was a way to say, yes, I can afford to have my food taste like a journey. Historians still argue whether the initial drive for spice trade was purely economic, a desire for profit, or if it was equally spurred by a genuine curiosity for new flavors and medicinal knowledge. Perhaps it was a delicate balance of both, a delicious dance between commerce and culture. What's undeniable is that these aromatic treasures didn't just add zest to meals. They spiced up the entire global economy, fostering connections, conflicts, and culinary creativity across continents. So, the next time you sprinkle some cinnamon on your oatmeal, take a moment to appreciate the epic saga that brought it to your table. It's a story far richer than you might imagine. From the potent punch of spices, we now shift our attention to something equally vital, though perhaps less dramatic, the humble yet mighty date palm. You're now venturing into the drier, sun-baked regions of the Silk Road, places where water was scarce and life clung stubbornly to oases. And in these life-giving pockets, the date palm wasn't just a plant. It was a veritable supermarket, pharmacy, and building supply store all rolled into one. You find yourself under the rustling fronds of a date palm, the air sweet with the scent of ripe fruit. It's a mainstream historical fact that dates were an absolutely essential food source across North Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Central Asia. Think about it, a small, unassuming fruit packed with natural sugars, fiber, and essential minerals capable of providing incredible energy for sustained journeys. For travelers and local populations alike, dates were often the primary source of calories. Imagine a caravan stopping at an oasis, exhausted and parched, and the first thing they reach for isn't a fancy meal, but handfuls of these sweet, energy-rich gems. They were the ultimate survival snack, compact and nutrient-dense, perfect for throwing into a pouch and munching on for days. But the date palm offered far more than just its fruit. It was a tree of 1,000 uses, a true symbol of resilience. In harsh environments, its leaves were woven into baskets, mats, and even shelters. Its fibers were used for ropes and fuel. The trunk provided timber, and the palm heart, though a delicacy that sometimes led to the demise of the tree, was also eaten. A quirky tidbit is that the very stones of the dates weren't wasted. They were often ground up and used as animal feed, ensuring no part of this miraculous plant went unused. Talk about zero waste before it was cool. This plant truly exemplifies nature's incredible bounty and humanity's ingenious adaptation. You see, for the people living along these arid stretches of the Silk Road, the date palm was a lifeline. It dictated settlements, influenced trade patterns, and even served, in some regions, as a form of currency. Imagine exchanging a certain measure of dates for goods or services, much like you'd use coins or bills today. Their stable value, ease of storage, and high nutritional content made them a reliable medium of exchange in local economies. This wasn't just about having something sweet. It was about having something valuable, something that literally powered daily life and commerce. Historians still argue whether the widespread cultivation and dependence on the date palm actively shaped the routes of the Silk Road, leading pathways to converge on oases, or if the routes developed independently and merely utilized the existing oases and their date bounty. Perhaps it was a symbiotic relationship, where the presence of dates made certain routes viable, and the routes, in turn, facilitated the spread and increased cultivation of the date palm. Regardless, their presence was undeniable, a sweet, sticky, constant in a world of flux and uncertainty. So, as you mentally nibble on a sun-dried date, consider its journey, from the Fertile Crescent across vast deserts, nourishing merchants, camels, and whole communities. It's a testament to the power of a single food item to sustain not just individuals, but entire economic and cultural systems. You're beginning to understand that every meal on the Silk Road wasn't just a simple act of eating. It was a profound connection to the land, the trade, and the ingenuity of people determined to survive and thrive. The sweet taste lingers, a reminder of ancient resilience. Having explored the fundamental grains and the enduring sweetness of dates, let's now turn our attention to a food item that has truly wound its way into the global culinary consciousness, the noodle. You might picture a bowl of steaming pasta in Italy or a comforting ramen in Japan, but the story of the noodle is far older and perhaps surprisingly deeply intertwined with the Silk Road. You're now stepping into a bustling market, the air alive with the scent of simmering broths and freshly pulled dough. It's a mainstream historical fact that evidence of the earliest noodles, made from millet, has been found in China, dating back some 4,000 years. Imagine that, long before anyone in Europe was dreaming of spaghetti, people in ancient China were enjoying their own versions of this versatile food. This discovery rocked the culinary history world because, for a long time, there was a widespread belief that Marco Polo brought noodles, or rather, pasta to Italy from China. While Polo certainly traveled and observed, the reality is far more complex and fascinating. The noodle's winding path west wasn't a one-way express train. It was a gradual diffusion, a slow and steady spread of culinary innovation. As people traveled the Silk Road, they brought their cooking techniques and ingredients with them. You can imagine a Central Asian caravanserai where a Chinese merchant might share his method for hand-pulling noodles with a local baker, who then adapts it to his own available grains and tastes. Over centuries, these techniques evolved and mutated, taking on different forms and textures depending on the local climate, available ingredients, and cultural preferences. A quirky tidbit: while Chinese noodles were often made from millet or wheat, the Italian pasta we know today developed primarily from durum wheat, which was better suited to their climate and culinary needs. So, while the concept of stretching or rolling dough into strands might have traveled, the specific ingredients and resulting dishes often diverged significantly. This wasn't a simple copy and paste job. It was a creative adaptation, a culinary conversation across cultures. You might even argue that the Silk Road was the original global food influencer, albeit one operating at a glacial pace compared to TikTok. You see, the beauty of the noodle, in all its forms, is its adaptability. It's a simple concept: flour and water, stretched or cut. But from that basic premise, an entire universe of dishes emerged. It could be a hearty, thick noodle for a nomadic herder, providing sustained energy, or a delicate, thin strand served in a courtly dish. It could be dried for long-term storage, making it an ideal provision for journeys, or made fresh for a quick, comforting meal at a stopover. Historians still argue whether the concept of noodles truly originated in a single location and spread, or if similar ideas of processing grains into strands arose independently in different parts of the world. What is certain, however, is that the Silk Road served as a vital conduit for the exchange and refinement of these techniques. It facilitated the cross-pollination of culinary ideas, leading to the incredible diversity of noodle dishes we enjoy globally today. So, the next time you slurp down a bowl of noodles, whether it's faux fettuccine or chow mein, remember that you're participating in a 4,000-year-old culinary dialogue, a conversation carried on the back of camels and the determination of countless travelers along those ancient routes. It's a truly amazing thought, isn't it? Having indulged in the delightful journey of noodles, let's now sip on something equally transformative, tea. You might think of it as just a comforting beverage, but on the Silk Road, tea underwent an incredible metamorphosis, transitioning from a medicinal concoction to a social ritual and an economic powerhouse. You're now transported to the misty mountains of ancient China, the birthplace of this remarkable leaf, and then to bustling caravanserai, where its aroma now permeates the air. It's a mainstream historical fact that tea originated in China, where it was initially consumed for its perceived medicinal properties. Imagine ancient herbalists brewing bitter infusions of tea leaves, believing they could cure ailments, aid digestion, or simply invigorate the mind. For centuries, its use remained largely confined to China, a well-guarded secret, but like so many other innovations, the magnetic pull of trade along the Silk Road ensured its eventual spread. You can picture monks and scholars carrying small pouches of dried tea leaves, introducing the practice to new regions as they traveled. The social ascent of tea was a gradual but profound shift. From a niche medicinal drink, it slowly began to permeate daily life, evolving into a beverage consumed for pleasure and social connection. As tea moved westward along the Silk Road, through Tibet, Central Asia, and eventually into Persia and beyond, local cultures adopted and adapted it, creating their own unique tea ceremonies and preparation methods. A quirky tidbit: in some nomadic cultures, tea was often mixed with yak, butter, and salt, creating a hearty, caloric drink that was essential for survival in harsh, cold climates. This was far from your delicate English breakfast. It was a potent, sustaining meal in a cup, a testament to the sheer adaptability of tea to different environments and needs. Think about the importance of a shared cup of tea in a caravanserai after a long, arduous day of travel. It wasn't just about rehydration, it was a moment of respite, a chance to share stories, conduct business, or simply connect with fellow travelers. Tea became a symbol of hospitality, a gesture of welcome. You're watching merchants from different lands, speaking different languages, communicating through the shared ritual of tea. It bridged cultural divides, warmed cold hands, and soothed weary souls. The economic impact of tea also grew exponentially. As demand increased, so did the infrastructure for its production and transportation. Special tea routes, sometimes considered offshoots of the main Silk Road, emerged, dedicated solely to carrying this precious cargo. Blocks of compressed tea, known as tea bricks, became a form of currency in some regions, used for trade and even as payment for taxes. You're witnessing the transformation of a humble leaf into a major driver of global commerce. Much like silk itself, historians still argue whether the primary driver for tea's westward expansion was its medicinal reputation or its growing social appeal. Perhaps it was a dynamic interplay, with its perceived health benefits initially drawing attention, and its social rituals solidifying its place in diverse cultures. What's undeniable is that tea, like so many other goods on the Silk Road, wasn't just transported, it was transformed. It adapted to new palates and customs, eventually becoming the most consumed beverage on the planet after water. So, as you hold your next cup of tea, remember its long and winding journey from a simple, medicinal brew to a global phenomenon steeped in history and shared human experience. You've seen how grains provided the foundation, how spices added zest and purpose, and how dates offered sweet energy. Now, Let's talk about the unsung heroes of long-distance travel and ancient survival. Fermented foods. You might associate fermentation with fancy kombucha or artisanal sourdough today. But on the Silk Road, it was a gritty, essential technology for keeping people alive. You're now witnessing ingenious methods of food preservation, born out of necessity and brilliant observation. It's a mainstream historical fact that fermentation, in its many forms, was crucial for preserving food long before the invention of refrigeration. Think about it. A merchant setting off on a 6-month journey across deserts and mountains couldn't just pack fresh vegetables and meats. They'd spoil almost immediately. But fermented foods, like cured meats, pickled vegetables, cheeses, and various fermented grains and drinks, offered a way to capture nutrients and make them last for extended periods, enduring fluctuations in temperature and rough handling. You can almost smell the pungent, earthy aroma of fermenting provisions being loaded onto camels. Consider the ingenuity involved. Without understanding microbiology, ancient peoples figured out that certain processes, like salting meat, brining vegetables, or allowing milk to sour and solidify, could transform perishable items into durable, portable sustenance. A quirky tidbit is the prevalence of fermented milk products, like Kumi's fermented mare's milk, among nomadic peoples in Central Asia. It wasn't just a drink. It was a potent source of protein, fat, and even a mild alcoholic kick, perfect for enduring the harsh conditions of the steppe. Imagine slurping down this tangy, slightly effervescent concoction, knowing it's keeping you going when fresh food is nowhere to be found. It was fuel and comfort in one. Fermentation also served another vital purpose, making food safer and more digestible. Many raw ingredients, if consumed directly, could cause illness. The fermentation process often breaks down complex sugars and proteins, making nutrients more bioavailable and eliminating harmful bacteria. So, that pickled cabbage wasn't just about flavor or preservation. It was about ensuring you didn't succumb to food poisoning in the middle of nowhere, which, let's be honest, would really put a damper on your trading ambitions. You're seeing how ancient food science, though rudimentary by today's standards, was incredibly effective and life-saving. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of fermentation techniques across diverse cultures was due to independent discovery driven by similar environmental pressures, or if the knowledge of these methods spread along the trade routes, much like other goods and ideas. Perhaps it was a combination of both, with local innovations being refined and disseminated through the constant interaction of travelers. What's undeniable is that fermented foods allowed for unprecedented levels of mobility and sustained human presence in environments that would otherwise be inhospitable. So, as you reflect on the global pantry, remember these powerful, pungent, and utterly indispensable fermented foods. They weren't just an acquired taste. They were the backbone of survival, allowing individuals and civilizations to push the boundaries of exploration and trade. They allowed the Silk Road to thrive, one carefully preserved bite at a time. Now that you've grasped the fundamental role of fermented foods in keeping bellies full and journeys possible, let's zoom in on a particular group of people who mastered the art of food in motion. The nomadic peoples. You're now envisioning vast open steppes, galloping horses, and resourceful communities whose entire existence revolved around movement. Their diet was a masterclass in efficiency and adaptability, forged by the very landscape they inhabited. It's a mainstream historical fact that nomadic groups, particularly those inhabiting the Central Asian steppes, were integral to the functioning of the Silk Road. They weren't just passive observers. They were traders, guides, protectors, and sometimes formidable obstacles. Their entire way of life, driven by the seasonal migration of their herds, meant their diet had to be inherently portable and sustainable without fixed agricultural settlements. You can practically hear the thundering hooves, feel the wind whipping across the vast plains, and sense the constant need for quick, energy-rich sustenance. Their mobile eating habits were shaped by their herds. Meat and dairy formed the bedrock of their diet. Think about it. Why grow crops when you have a walking, breathing pantry of sheep, goats, and horses? They consumed meat fresh when available, but more often they relied on preserved forms. Dried meats, like jerky, the original power bar, perhaps, were essential for long treks, providing concentrated protein in a lightweight form. A quirky tidbit: some nomadic groups would even make a type of blood sausage from their animals, ensuring that every part of the animal was utilized. Waste, not want, not right. It sounds a bit intense now, but it was a perfect example of survival and resourcefulness. But it wasn't just about meat. Dairy products, as you can imagine, were paramount. Milk from mares, camels, and yaks was consumed fresh, but more often it was processed into something more durable. We already touched upon kumis, the fermented mare's milk, but also consider curate or curate, a type of hard, dried cheese or yogurt ball. These rock-hard little spheres might not look appealing, but they were incredibly calorie-dense, lasted for ages, and could be rehydrated or gnawed on, providing vital nutrients in a portable package. You can imagine a rider effortlessly pulling one from a saddlebag, a quick, robust snack to keep the journey going. The innovations in their diet were born from this mobile lifestyle. They developed sophisticated methods for drying, smoking, and fermenting their food, ensuring a consistent supply of nourishment year-round, regardless of their location. Their reliance on animal products also meant their diet was rich in fats and proteins, crucial for enduring the harsh climate and physically demanding lifestyle. They were, in many ways, the original pioneers of portable, high-energy nutrition. Historians still argue whether the culinary practices of nomadic groups significantly influenced the settled populations along the Silk Road, or if the exchange was more reciprocal. Perhaps the efficiency of nomadic food preparation inspired settled communities to adopt similar preservation techniques, while settled agricultural practices introduced new grains and vegetables to the nomadic diet. What's undeniable is the mutual interaction and influence that occurred. The nomadic diet wasn't just about survival. It was a highly optimized, culturally rich system that supported a dynamic way of life and played a critical role in facilitating the vast trade networks of the Silk Road. You're learning that food is never just food. It's a reflection of an entire culture's ingenuity and adaptation. You've seen how food sustained the individual traveler and entire nomadic cultures. Now, let's consider how food transcended mere sustenance to become a powerful tool in international relations. Food as diplomatic currency. On the Silk Road, a shared meal wasn't just a polite gesture. It was often a strategic move, a way to build trust, solidify alliances, or even subtly assert dominance. You're now envisioning lavish banquets in distant courts and humble meals shared under dusty skies, all imbued with political significance. It's a mainstream historical fact that throughout history, food has been used as a means of diplomacy. On the Silk Road, where diverse cultures and powerful empires intersected, sharing a meal became a crucial act of engagement. When an ambassador arrived from a distant land, A grand feast was often among the first orders of business. These weren't casual dinners, they were meticulously planned events designed to impress, honor, and facilitate negotiations. You can almost hear the clinking of gold and silver vessels, the murmuring of dignitaries, and the rich aromas of exotic dishes designed to showcase wealth and power. Think about the sheer logistics of such an event. Sourcing rare spices, exotic meats, and fine wines from across the known world, all to create a culinary spectacle. This display wasn't just about generosity. It was a clear demonstration of economic reach and political influence. To offer a dish made with ingredients from a land thousands of miles away was a subtle way of saying, we have connections, we have power, and we can access the world's treasures. A quirky tidbit is that some historical accounts describe elaborate banquets where animals like peacocks or even camels were prepared whole, not just for their meat, but for their symbolic grandeur, further emphasizing the host's immense resources. Imagine the medieval equivalent of a 5-star Michelin restaurant, but with far higher stakes and no Yelp reviews. Beyond the grand feasts, the simple act of sharing meals cemented alliances and treaties. Imagine two leaders, perhaps a nomadic Khan and a settled emperor, sitting down to break bread or flatbreads or noodles. This act, more intimate than formal decrees, built personal bonds and fostered understanding. It created a sense of shared humanity, even between potential adversaries. Trust was often forged over a bowl of stew or a cup of spiced tea. It was harder to declare war on someone with whom you'd just shared a hearty meal. Of course, the diplomatic table wasn't always about peace. Sometimes, the quality and quantity of food served could be a subtle slight, a way to signal disinterest or even disdain. Or, conversely, refusing to eat offered food could be a powerful statement of defiance or suspicion. You're witnessing the silent language of food playing out on the diplomatic stage, where every dish, every morsel, could carry layers of meaning. Historians still argue whether the culinary exchange during diplomatic events was a primary driver of food diffusion along the Silk Road, or if practical trade and cultural migration were more significant. Perhaps it was a complementary process. Diplomatic feasts showcased new ingredients and cooking styles, sparking interest, while the constant flow of goods and people facilitated their wider adoption. What's undeniable is that food was never just sustenance. It was a crucial instrument in the intricate dance of medieval power and international relations. So, the next time you share a meal with someone, consider the millennial tradition of connecting over food, a tradition that stretched across continents and shaped the very course of history. You've explored how food was a tool for diplomacy, a silent negotiator in the grand game of empires. But life on the Silk Road wasn't always about grand feasts and political maneuvers. It swung wildly between extremes, a constant dance between feasting and famine's shadow. You're now witnessing the brutal realities of existence along these ancient routes, where abundance could quickly turn to desperate scarcity. It's a mainstream historical fact that while trade brought incredible wealth and exotic goods, the vast majority of people, especially those directly involved in the arduous travel, lived a precarious existence. Imagine arriving at a bustling caravanserai after weeks of desolate travel, finding it overflowing with merchants, fresh provisions, and lively music. This was a moment of feasting, a brief period of joyous excess where food was plentiful, diverse, and often celebrated. You could find roasted meats, sweet pastries, fresh fruits, and perhaps even some of that special spiced tea. These were moments of relief and rejuvenation, allowing travelers to regain strength and morale. You can almost taste the rich, fatty lamb, hear the joyous chatter, and feel the warmth of camaraderie. However, these pockets of plenty were often temporary and localized. Just beyond the walls of an oasis town, the harsh reality of the desert, or the unforgiving mountain passes loomed large. The shadow of famine was a constant companion. A single failed harvest, a bandit raid, an unexpected drought, or even just a particularly harsh winter could plunge entire regions into starvation. Supplies could run out on long journeys, leaving travelers facing the agonizing choice between pushing forward with empty stomachs or risking turning back. You're watching the lean faces of travelers, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of provisions, their very survival hanging by a thread, a quirky tidbit during times of extreme scarcity. It wasn't uncommon for desperate travelers to resort to eating the dried leather from their camel saddles, or even boiled boots to extract any last bit of nutrient. While it sounds grim, it's a testament to the sheer will to survive in the face of absolute nothingness. These were not choices made lightly, but out of dire necessity. You're reminded that for all the exotic spices and fine silks, life was often brutally simple. Eat or perish. The contrast between these two states, the lavish feast and the gnawing hunger, shaped the psychology and practices of those on the Silk Road. It instilled a deep appreciation for abundance when it arrived, and an intense drive to preserve and store food whenever possible. It also led to innovative ways of foraging and utilizing every available resource, even if it meant venturing into unconventional food sources. Historians still argue whether the cycles of feast and famine along the Silk Road were primarily driven by natural climatic variations or by human factors like political instability, warfare, and disruptions to trade routes. Perhaps it was a complex interplay, with environmental challenges exacerbating the effects of human conflict and vice versa. What's undeniable is that navigating this extreme dietary landscape was a defining characteristic of life along these routes. It taught resilience, resourcefulness, and a profound respect for food. You're leaving this section with a clearer understanding of the sheer fragility of life and the immense value placed on every single meal. A stark reminder that our modern abundance is a relatively new luxury, having witnessed the stark extremes of feast and famine. Let's now pivot to something far more delightful: the explosion of culinary fusion that occurred along the Silk Road. You're entering a vibrant marketplace where ingredients, techniques, and flavors from vastly different cultures are colliding, mixing, and creating entirely new, exciting tastes. This wasn't just about sharing, it was about inventing. It's a mainstream historical fact that the constant movement of people, goods, and ideas along the Silk Road led to an unprecedented level of cultural exchange. And nowhere was this more evident than in the kitchen. Imagine a merchant from Persia arriving in China, bringing with him new spices and cooking methods, or a Central Asian nomad sharing his dairy preservation techniques with a settled farmer in the Mediterranean. These interactions weren't just transactional, they were transformative, leading to the exciting blend of ingredients across cultures. You can almost smell the intoxicating mix of unfamiliar aromas, feel the bustling energy of innovation. Consider the journey of ingredients. Peaches and apricots, originating in China, traveled westward, eventually becoming staples in Persian and Roman diets. Spinach, initially from Persia, made its way to China and then Europe. Rice, while cultivated in Various regions saw new varieties and cooking methods spread. But it wasn't just raw ingredients. It was about how they were used. Think about the Persian influence on Indian cuisine, leading to the development of rich, aromatic curries, or the Central Asian influence on the flatbreads and pastries found across the Middle East. A quirky tidbit: the technique of distillation, crucial for creating stronger alcoholic spirits, is believed by some historians to have spread from the Middle East to China and then later to Europe along these routes. While not a food itself, this process profoundly impacted the beverages consumed and traded, allowing for more potent and portable forms of alcohol, further fueling both celebration and commerce. Imagine a Chinese court adopting the delicate art of rosewater distillation from a Persian visitor, a perfect example of how culinary techniques were just as valuable as the ingredients themselves. You see, this culinary fusion wasn't always intentional. Sometimes it happened simply out of necessity, using what was available locally to recreate a familiar dish. Other times, it was a deliberate experiment, a curious cook trying to incorporate a newly encountered ingredient into their traditional recipes. The result was a dynamic, ever-evolving culinary landscape where new dishes were born and old ones were reimagined. This ongoing cross-pollination enriched the diets of countless people and laid the groundwork for many of the beloved cuisines we enjoy today. Historians still argue whether the most significant culinary innovations on the Silk Road were driven by the introduction of entirely new ingredients or by the adaptation of existing ingredients using foreign techniques. Perhaps it was a synergistic effect, where new ingredients sparked new ideas, and new techniques made previously inaccessible ingredients usable. What's undeniable is that the Silk Road was a giant, simmering melting pot of flavors, a place where culinary boundaries blurred and delicious experiments flourished. So, the next time you enjoy a dish that blends influences from different parts of the world, remember that you're experiencing a legacy that began centuries ago on the dusty, diverse pathways of the Silk Road. It truly was a feast for the senses and a testament to human creativity. You've just tasted the vibrant tapestry of culinary fusion, a testament to the exchange of ideas and ingredients. Now, let's explore the beating heart of these exchanges, the indispensable havens that dotted the routes, the humble, mighty caravanserai. You're stepping into one of these ancient roadside inns, a bustling hub where weary travelers, their animals, and their precious cargo found rest, sustenance, and community. It's a mainstream historical fact that caravanserais were vital institutions along the Silk Road, serving as fortified inns or roadside stations. Imagine them as a cross between a motel, a warehouse, a stable, and a marketplace, all enclosed within sturdy walls, often around a central courtyard. They were strategically placed a day's journey apart, typically about 30 kilometers or roughly 18 to 20 miles, allowing caravans to travel from one safe haven to the next. You can hear the low murmur of conversations in multiple languages, the braying of camels, and the distant clatter of cooking pots. These aren't just places to crash. They were economic and social epicenters. The food offerings within a caravanserai were incredibly important. While they might not have boasted five-star dining, they provided essential sustenance and, often, a much-needed variety from the monotonous travel diet. You'd find basic provisions like fresh water, grains for both humans and animals, and perhaps some local produce if available. Meat, often freshly slaughtered or cured, would be prepared over open fires. Imagine the tantalizing aroma of roasting lamb wafting through the air after weeks of hardtack and dried fruit. A quirky tidbit beyond the basic provisions. Many larger caravanserais had communal kitchens or designated cooking areas where travelers could prepare their own meals, using their personal supplies or purchasing ingredients from local vendors who would set up stalls within the courtyard. This wasn't just about cooking. It was a chance to share recipes, demonstrate techniques, and further blend culinary traditions in a truly organic way. You might see a Chinese merchant teaching a Persian trader how to properly steam dumplings, or a Central Asian nomad showing off his method for making curate. It was a culinary classroom under the stars, powered by shared need and curiosity. The caravanserai also offered a sense of security. Bandits were a constant threat on the Silk Road, and the sturdy walls of a caravanserai provided a safe refuge for merchants and their valuable goods overnight. This security also extended to food. Knowing you could find a safe place to rest, reprovision, and cook a hot meal meant the difference between life and death for many. Historians still argue whether the primary role of caravanserais was economic, facilitating trade by providing secure waypoints, or social, fostering cultural exchange and community among travelers. Perhaps it was an inseparable blend of both, with the practical necessity of rest and security leading directly to rich cultural interactions, especially around the shared experience of food. What's undeniable is that these structures were the lifeblood of the Silk Road, literally sustaining its flow. So, the next time you think of a rest stop, imagine a caravanserai, a place where exhaustion met comfort, and the world's flavors truly mingled, one shared meal at a time. You've just rested within the protective walls of a caravanserai, feeling the echoes of countless travelers finding respite. Now, let's shift to a more sobering, yet utterly vital, aspect of life and food on the Silk Road, the grim reality of disease, diet, and deliverance. For all the wonders of trade and culinary fusion, the movement of people and provisions also meant the movement of microbes, often with devastating consequences. You're now confronting the darker side of global connectivity, where a simple meal could sometimes be a gamble. It's a mainstream historical fact that along with goods and ideas, the Silk Road was also a primary conduit for the spread of diseases. The Black Death, or the bubonic plague, is perhaps the most infamous example, tracing its devastating journey from Central Asia westward along these very routes in the 14th century. But long before and after the plague, countless other pathogens, from dysentery to smallpox, thrived in the crowded conditions of caravans, bustling markets, and caravanserais. You can imagine the fear, the whispered rumors of sickness spreading from the next caravan, the desperate attempts to protect oneself. This is where diet played a complicated, often cruel, role. On one hand, a robust and varied diet was crucial for maintaining health and immunity. Travelers with access to fresh produce, protein, and clean water were better equipped to resist illness. We talked about fermented foods. They weren't just for preservation. They often contained beneficial microbes that aided gut health, providing a natural defense against some pathogens. But for many, especially those on long, arduous journeys or living in areas prone to drought or conflict, consistent access to nutritious food was a luxury. Conversely, contaminated food or water was a primary vector for disease transmission. Eating spoiled meat, drinking from unsanitary sources, or consuming food prepared in unhygienic conditions could quickly lead to debilitating illnesses like dysentery, which could rapidly prove fatal in a remote desert or mountain pass. A quirky tidbit: Some ancient medical texts from along the Silk Road mention specific dietary recommendations for preventing illness, often focusing on consuming easily digestible foods or using certain herbs and spices known for their antimicrobial properties. While their understanding of germ theory was rudimentary, their observations often led to practical and sometimes effective preventative measures, like boiling water or avoiding certain foods during outbreaks. Think of it as ancient public health advice, often delivered by a wise elder with a good understanding of herbs. The dream of deliverance from disease was constant. People prayed, consulted healers, and relied on traditional remedies. Access to clean water and reliable food sources was often the best defense. Those who understood how to purify water, even simply by boiling it, if fuel was available, or choose safer food options, had a significantly higher chance of survival. This era also saw the exchange of medical knowledge alongside physical goods. Chinese medical texts, Persian herbal remedies, and Indian Ayurvedic practices all flowed along the Silk Road, offering glimmers of hope in the face of widespread sickness. Historians still argue whether the frequency and severity of disease outbreaks along the Silk Road were primarily due to the increased density of human and animal populations, or to climatic factors that favored pathogen transmission. Perhaps it was a combination, with the interconnectedness of the routes merely providing the perfect highway for diseases to travel. What's undeniable is that the constant specter of illness profoundly shaped daily life, travel planning, and even dietary choices on the Silk Road, adding a perilous dimension to every meal. You're reminded that progress and connection often come with a hidden cost, and that even a simple bite of food could sometimes carry a deadly secret. You've just navigated the fraught intersection of food and disease, a stark reminder of the fragility of life on these ancient paths. Now, let's lighten the mood slightly and explore the diverse world of beverages beyond the basics. While water was and remains the ultimate thirst quencher, the Silk Road was awash with a fascinating array of drinks, each with its own story, cultural significance, and sometimes a kick. You're now envisioning bustling taverns, quiet tea houses, and nomadic camps, all offering something more than just plain water. It's a mainstream historical fact that in many ancient cultures, fermented beverages like wine and beer were safer to drink than water, due to the alcohol content and the fermentation process killing off many pathogens. This was certainly true along parts of the Silk Road, in the western reaches, particularly around Persia and the Mediterranean. Wine was a prominent drink. Grapes, cultivated for millennia, were crushed and fermented into various forms of wine, ranging from everyday quaffs to highly prized vintages. You can almost taste the tartness, the earthy notes of a rustic wine served in a clay cup, a welcome end to a long day's journey. This wasn't just for pleasure, it was a calorie-rich liquid, provision that could be stored and transported. But as you move eastward, the beverage landscape shifts. In Central Asia, among the nomadic peoples, we revisit kumis, the fermented mare's milk. While we touched on it as a fermented food, it was primarily consumed as a drink, a staple of their diet. It was both nourishing and mildly intoxicating, offering warmth and a sense of well-being in the often harsh steppe environment. A quirky tidbit is that kumis, while perhaps an acquired taste for some, was so vital that special ceremonial vessels were often used for its preparation and consumption, highlighting its cultural importance beyond mere sustenance. Imagine the foamy, tangy liquid passed around a circle of nomads, a shared moment of communal life, Further east, in China, tea, as you now know, reigned supreme. But it wasn't the only beverage. Various forms of fermented grain drinks, similar to early beers, existed. The Silk Road also facilitated the spread of distillation techniques, leading to more potent spirits. These weren't always for casual consumption. Sometimes they served medicinal purposes, warming the body in cold climates or used in rituals. The exchange wasn't just about the finished product, but also the methods. Winemaking techniques from Persia could influence vineyards in China. And conversely, the unique ways of preparing tea in the East captivated tastes in the West. You're witnessing a dynamic flow of beverage culture, driven by both pleasure and practicality. Historians still argue whether the primary driver for the spread of certain beverages was purely commercial, seeking new markets, or if cultural diffusion, through migration and intermarriage, played a more significant role in their adoption. Perhaps it was a blend of both, with the commercial routes acting as conduits for cultural practices to slowly seep into new societies. What's undeniable is that the liquid refreshments of the Silk Road were as diverse and fascinating as the goods themselves, quenching thirsts, building camaraderie, and providing a powerful glimpse into the daily lives and rituals of countless people across vast distances. So, raise an imaginary glass, be it wine, kumis, or spiced tea, to the liquid stories of the Silk Road. You've traversed continents through the lens of ancient meals, tasted the staple grains, felt the sting of spices, the sweetness of dates, the comfort of noodles, and the warmth of diverse beverages. Now, as our phantom journey draws to a close, let's reflect on the profound legacy of Silk Road sustenance. You're standing at the crossroads of history, looking back at the enduring impact of these medieval culinary exchanges on the world we inhabit today. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Silk Road was not just a historical curiosity. It was a foundational element in shaping the modern world, and its impact on global cuisine is particularly profound. Think about your own pantry, your favorite restaurant, or even the ingredients in your daily meals. Chances are, many of them, or the techniques used to prepare them, have a direct lineage back to the exchanges that occurred along these ancient routes. You can almost see the invisible threads of connection, linking your dinner plate to a merchant's camel train from centuries ago. Consider the dishes we discussed. Noodles, in countless forms, are now a global comfort food. The very idea of using a wide array of spices to flavor and preserve food is a concept that blossomed through Silk Road trade. Dates remain a significant food source and a sweet treat worldwide. These weren't just temporary trends. They were permanent additions to the global pantry, proving that good food, like good ideas, tends to stick around. A quirky tidbit: the common carrot, originally purple or yellow in Afghanistan and Central Asia, spread westward along the Silk Road, eventually being selectively bred into the orange variety we know today. So, that vibrant orange veggie on your plate is a direct descendant of a long-lost Silk Road traveler, carrying genetic information from ancient Afghan fields. It's a delicious example of how even the most mundane items have an epic backstory. The lasting global impact of medieval culinary exchange is evident in the sheer diversity of cuisines. Without the Silk Road, Italian pasta might never have developed its characteristic forms. Indian curries might lack their aromatic depth, and even your morning coffee, which arrived much later but followed similar trade principles, might not exist as we know it. The routes facilitated a grand experiment in culinary cross-pollination, proving that when cultures mix, the results can be incredibly flavorful. Historians still argue whether the Silk Road's primary contribution to global food history was the introduction of entirely new food items to different regions, or the widespread dissemination of advanced agricultural and culinary techniques. Perhaps it was an inseparable dance between the two, with new ingredients spurring new methods, and new methods making new ingredients desirable and accessible. What's undeniable is the irreversible transformation it brought about. The Silk Road created a truly interconnected food system, demonstrating the power of human connection to enrich not just economies, but also daily life and culture, one delicious bite at a time. You're now standing at the end of this journey, your mind filled with images of ancient markets, laden camels, and shared meals. As you prepare to drift off, remember that every ingredient tells a story, and every meal is a living echo of countless journeys and exchanges across time and space. All right, it's time to gently bring our long, delicious journey to a close. Feel the soft, persistent hum in the background, like the distant, rhythmic footsteps of a caravan on a quiet night. Let your breathing deepen, slowing down, settling into a peaceful rhythm. You've traveled so far, across vast distances and through centuries of culinary history, all from the comfort of your bed. Imagine those ancient trade routes, not as dusty, challenging paths, but as gentle ribbons of connection unfurling across. The map carrying flavors and friendships across continents. The spices, the dates, the noodles, they're not just food anymore, are they? They're whispers of history, tiny tangible pieces of a grand human story. Each one a testament to resilience, ingenuity, and the simple, profound act of sharing. The world feels a little smaller now, a little more connected, knowing that the meals on your table carry echoes of those long ago journeys. Let that feeling of peaceful connection settle deep within you, as the images of bustling markets and starlit caravans begin to fade. Let your mind become quiet. There's no need to hold on to anything. Simply allow the gentle flow of these stories to lull you. The Silk Road's legacy, its flavors, its silent wisdom, will be there for you to revisit whenever you wish. For now, simply rest. Let the days, thoughts drift away like clouds on a calm evening breeze. You've explored so much, learned so much. It's time for quiet, time for peace. The long journey is complete. Your mind is full, your spirit calm. Rest well, knowing the world is a little more delicious, a little more connected, because of the ancient pathways you've just explored. Sweet dreams.